Beneath the vast, untamed sky of Texas in 1881, where dust dances with the wind and the sun scorches the earth, a solitary rancher's life is about to transform in ways he never dared dream. A chance encounter at a fading autumn auction unveils a connection forged not in words, but in the quiet pulse of understanding, a bond that defies the harshness of the frontier and the whispers of a wary town. Prepare to be swept away by a tale of resilience, trust, and a love that listens deeper than sound itself. Saddle up for a journey through the wild heart of the West. Hit that bell, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories, like and drop a comment to ride along with us. In the waning days of fall, the market town buzzed with the clamor of bartering men, their voices rough with liquor and grit. Horses snorted, cattle lowed, and the air hung heavy with the scent of sweat and dry earth. The final livestock sale of the season dwindled, yet a knot of folks lingered by a weathered corral gate where a weary chestnut mare quivered, her ribs jutting beneath a coat streaked with crusted blood. Caleb Warwick, a quiet man of 35, shaped by the relentless plains and a life of solitude, adjusted his brim against the blazing glare. He seldom ventured to town, save for necessities or stock. That morning, he'd glimpsed the mare and circled back, his boots thumping the packed clay as the crowd thinned. Then he saw her, a young woman, barely 19, standing just beyond the fence. Her hair clung to her face in tangled clumps, her skirt frayed at the edges, her bare feet caked with dust. Her gaze drifted unfocused, as if chasing a vision invisible to others. Beside her stood a grizzled man, a bottle in one fist, a cord in the other, tied not to a beast, but to her slender wrist. "Got a mute one here," he bellowed, slurring. "To the wind. Came from my first missus, I reckon. Don't talk, don't hear, but she scrubs, cooks, don't jaw back, cheap." A few men snickered, low and mean. One spat into the dirt. Caleb turned away, his mind set on the mare, not this grim scene. But then he felt it, not a sound, not a plea, just a stare. She was watching him, her eyes steady, calm, holding no desperation, only a quiet clarity, a reflection perhaps of his own lonesome spirit. The drunk staggered near. "You, got cash? Want the mare? She's yours with her. I ain't hauling her back, not worth the mud on her feet." Caleb paused, the mare snorting foam, the girl's gaze unwavering. He faced the man, jaw tight. "I'll take both." Laughter erupted, coarse and jeering. "You trading for stock or building a harem, Warwick?" a voice taunted. Caleb stayed silent, dropping coins into the man's palm. Enough for a horse, too little for a life. The drunk jerked the cord, but the girl shrank behind Caleb, instinctive, wary. "She's yours, partner," the man mumbled. "Don't say I didn't warn you. Ain't worth a crust." Caleb untied the rope, flung it aside, and led the mare from the pen. The girl trailed, her steps light, deliberate, clutching only a threadbare shawl. At his wagon she halted, waiting, mute. He gestured to the back. She climbed in, curling into a corner like a shadow accustomed to fading. As he took the reins, a faint tug brushed his coat. Her small, rough fingers grazed his sleeve just once, then fell. Her eyes fixed on the distant ridges, and in that fleeting touch he sensed it. She'd chosen to trust him, Caleb Warwick, a man who conversed more with beasts than folks, dwelling alone on 200 acres of crimson Texas soil, fenced by solitude and unmarked wounds. He flicked the reins, the wagon groaning forward, wheels grinding over the rugged trail. Dusk settled, dust swirling as they wound through low hills and sparse mesquite, the land stretching wide under a boundless sky. The girl sat huddled beneath a blanket, face tilted to the breeze, never glancing back. Neither did he. His ranch emerged modest, a slanted roof house, a scatter of sheds, and endless prairie where cattle roamed free. It was still, tidy, and for a man like Caleb it had sufficed, until this moment. He eased her down from the wagon, unsure if she'd flee or stiffen. She stepped lightly, her eyes scanning the expanse. not fearful, just observant, as if mapping every inch without a word. Inside, Caleb stoked the hearth and nodded to the kettle. She moved to it, sure and swift, fetching tin mugs and a ladle like she'd always tended a fire. Still, no sound escaped her. After a sparse meal, he pulled a stick of chalk from a shelf and tapped the table's edge. "Name," he said, slow and clear. She stared, then knelt, etching in faint, slanted strokes. Leora. He tested it. Leora, the word lingering like a new flavor on the wind. She offered no grin, turning instead to the dim barn. Dawn broke, and Caleb found her in the stable, crouched by the weary mare. The animal hadn't eaten, its hind leg puffed from strain. Leora smoothed a wet rag along its side, her hands murmuring a gentle cadence, not speech, not gestures, just a tender rhythm of care. Caleb leaned against the barn door, arms folded. He'd seen hands get tossed for less, yet the mare stood, calm, trembling faintly as Leora bound its leg with quiet skill. She couldn't hear, but she grasped more than most. He gave her tasks, scrub the planks, heat water, polish the gear. She worked without protest, silent, steady. Each evening he left chalk and she scribbled notes, grain short, calf hobbling, air hints at rain. They didn't talk, but the stillness felt alive. Then a storm brewed, sly at first, a warm gust teasing the grass at sundown. Caleb eyed the horizon, clouds massing, but shrugged it off. He was in the shed, tending a weak calf when Leora appeared, barefoot, hair wild, breath fast, voiceless. She gripped his sleeve, tugging hard. "What?" he asked, startled. She pointed skyward, hands shaking, eyes shouting what lips couldn't. He wavered, mid-task, but her urgency jolted him. She pulled again toward the barn door, away from the pens. Then it struck, a deafening snap, a lightning bolt cleaving the sky, blasting a tree behind the shed. Flames roared, the trunk crashed, shaking the ground. Calves bawled, smoke coiled upward. Caleb reeled, stunned. Leora stood just outside, face aglow in the firelight, steady, chest heaving. She'd known, not guessed, not felt, but known, before the rumble, before the air turned. That night, the fire quenched, the beasts soothed. Caleb sat with her at the table. No chalk, no marks, just a man and a girl who spoke no words, yet heard the world's pulse. He gazed at her hands, folded in her lap. "Leora," he said, soft. She met his eyes, silence her reply, and it held weight. For the first time in years, Caleb Warwick, carved by solitude, felt a presence beside him, a quiet force, a mystery, a mirror to his own unspoken heart. The days after the storm unfurled like a slow dawn, the Texas plains settling into a fragile calm. Caleb Warwick, a man etched by years of lonesome toil, found himself watching Leora with a quiet wonder. She moved through the ranch with a grace that didn't need sound, tending the hearth, sweeping the porch, her hands tracing patterns of care across his rugged world. He'd lived too long in the hush of his 200 acres, fenced by solitude. Yet now her presence stirred something new, a rhythm beneath the stillness. Leora never uttered a word, never gestured in formal signs, but her insight cut deeper than speech. One crisp morning, a stubborn heifer lingered apart from the herd, its muzzle low, appetite gone. Caleb scratched a note to check it later, blaming the chill. But Leora, unfaltering, strode to the barn, hauling straw to a sheltered stall, fetching a pail with mint sprigs from the well. She knelt by the beast, her palms gliding over its swollen flank in steady, soothing strokes. By dusk, the cow heaved through labor, a calf wobbling free. She'd sensed it, known it, without a hint from the sky or the herd. Caleb stood back, arms crossed, marveling at her unspoken wisdom. The weight of the land pressed heavy on Caleb's shoulders. He rode into town one day, tension knotting his frame, the sheriff's words still burning in his ears. muttered hints and veiled jabs about his family's claim. Land rested in the war's bloody wake, a legacy of strife and shame. He said nothing to Leora, guarding his turmoil, but as he slumped on the porch steps, gazing into the fading light, she appeared. Silent, she settled beside him, her hand resting light on his shoulder, gentle as a zephyr, firm as a promise. After a beat he rasped, "How'd you guess the ache I carry for this soil, the stain my kin left behind?" Her deep eyes searched his, then her fingers drifted to his chest, pressing over his heart, steady, knowing. She turned, stepping toward the gnarled oak marking his father's grave, a place she'd never named yet somehow understood. That night, sleep fled Caleb. Dreams of gunfire and charred hills haunted him, his father's gruff voice echoing through the haze. "I carved this land for you, Caleb, and the cost stains us both." He jolted awake, breath ragged, sweat beading his brow. By the hearth Leora sat, a lone candle casting her face in shadow and light. Beside it lay a faded kerchief, blue, edged with hand-stitched lace, his mother's, buried in a trunk for a decade untouched. He blinked, rising. "How'd you—" But she stood, silent, gliding to the door, no explanation needed. She'd felt it. Not the cloth, not the past, but the grief coiled tight in his ribs, the silent crack of a pride too heavy to voice. For the first time, Caleb feared not the land, not his name, but losing her, the one who heard his heart before he shaped it into words. Trouble brewed beyond the ranch. The blacksmith's wife hissed under her porch, folding linens, her voice sharp. She stares at the herd too long, like she knows which'll drop next. By week's end, the preacher's boy fueled the talk, muttering to a crowd, "She brushed our kid goat, and it birthed too soon, ain't right." Leora gave no sound, no defense, and the town filled her silence with dread. At the store, a mother yanked her young'un back as Leora reached for meal. A man spat near her dusty feet. Her fingers tightened on her basket. Her steps grew softer, as if fading from a world that scorned her quiet gift. Caleb saw it, felt the sting, but held his tongue, and she never asked why folks shunned her gentle ways. Then a rancher's lad fell ill, fever blazing, twisting in his sleep. No doctor came, but Leora did, slipping into the barn where he lay. She knelt, unasked, her hand resting on his chest, then his brow, eyes shut in focus. She rose, plucked sage, yarrow, and wild, mint from Caleb's drying rack, steeping them in a hot cloth. The boy sipped, silent, and by dawn he sat up, hungry. His ma wept, clutching Leora's hand in gratitude, but the next day she murmured at the well. She didn't ask his ailment. How'd she know? 3 days later, dusk brought trouble. 8 townsfolk marched to Caleb's gate, boots churning dust, torches gripped like threats, unlit but bold. Old man Grayson, estranged from his own kin, stepped up. "We want her out," he growled. "That girl senses things she shouldn't." Caleb planted himself at the barn's edge, unshaven, face hard as the beams behind him. "She's silent," he said. "Silent ain't blind," Grayson shot back. "She reads the sky before it moves, calms beasts like they whisper to her. My steer fell dead after she touched it. Cursed, I say." A murmur rippled through the cluster. Inside, Leora peered past the curtain, feeling the gravel shift, seeing their twisted faces, not rage, but conviction. She moved to the door, but Caleb raised a hand, stepping forward, boots sinking into the mud. "She saved a child," he said. "Maybe she sparked his fever first," a woman sneered. Caleb's voice stayed level, fierce. "She's the only soul I've met who truly hears, not with ears but hands, breath, her whole being." He scanned them, eyes steady. "I've walked this earth 35 years, and few grasp my quiet, my burdens, my pain. She does, without a word. You want to chase off someone for seeing what you fear? You'll face me first." Grayson faltered, mouths shut and the group drifted off, torches cold, steps heavy. That night the ranch lay still save the wind. Leora warmed cider by the fire, then sat by Caleb. No glance, no note, just her fingers brushing his hand, not gratitude, but a quiet bond. He turned his palm, lacing his grip with hers, and in the hush, the crackle of logs and the night's breath wove them closer, two spirits hearing what words never could. As December's first snow dusted the Texas plains, the world softened, wrapping Caleb Warwick's ranch in a quiet veil. The harsh edges of the land blurred under a delicate frost, and Leora moved through the days with a steady purpose, her hands weaving care into every task. She stitched a cloak for Caleb, not from need, but foresight, threading scraps of wool and leather from his old coat, sensing the cold's bite before it arrived. Her fingers danced with the needle, deliberate, as if she could feel the coming chill in her bones. Caleb watched from the barn's threshold, his breath catching at her quiet resolve, her presence a melody in the stillness of his world. The ranch found a new rhythm. Leora rose before dawn, brewing coffee as the sky bled grey, lining the henhouse. With cedar shavings, brushing the horses in slow, deliberate arcs. She tamed skittish colts with gestures no rancher had ever tried. Open palms, patient pauses, a stillness that drew trust. Animals leaned into her touch, calmed by her silent understanding. The quiet that once cloaked Caleb's days, no longer. It felt like solitude. It was a shared listening, a language carved in glances and gentle motions, but the town's whispers lingered, faint but sharp, like thorns beneath the snow. The blacksmith's wife, her voice low at the market, muttered of Leora's uncanny ways. She knows too much, feels what ain't spoken. The preacher's boy, emboldened by a crowd, swore she'd brushed a ewe that later birthed frail lambs. "It's not natural," he hissed. Leora, voiceless, offered no defense, and the silence she left was filled with suspicion. At the general store, a woman sidestepped her basket. A man's scowl followed her through the dust. Caleb saw the tightening of her hands, the softening of her steps, as if she could will herself unseen. He held his tongue, but the weight of their judgment pressed against his chest, yet kindness crept through the cracks. A rancher's son, racked with chills, lay tossing in a hay-strewn loft. No doctor rode out, but Leora came, her steps soft as snowfall. She knelt beside the boy, her palm resting on his fevered brow, then his chest, her eyes closed in quiet focus. She gathered herbs, lavender, sage, wild yarrow, from Caleb's drying rack, steeping them into a steaming poultice. By morning the boy stirred, hunger returning, his mother's tears falling as she pressed Leora's hands in thanks. But whispers followed. How'd she know without asking? How'd she see? One late afternoon, Caleb rode to the ridge, checking, fences against a brewing storm. The sky hung heavy, the air thick with a restless charge. His mare spooked, a rustle, a scent, or something unseen, and reared, pitching him to the frozen earth. Pain seared through his shoulder, his elbow gashed where it struck a jagged root. He staggered upright, blood seeping, the dusk deepening, fast. Wrapping a cloth around the wound, he stumbled toward the ranch, each step a lance through his ribs. Leora met him before he reached the door, her eyes wide, sensing what no call could convey. She guided him inside, easing him by the hearth, her fingers peeling back the bloodied cloth with a tenderness that steadied his breath. She cleaned the cut, pressing a mix of yarrow and pine resin to the wound, her brow knit with focus. Caleb watched, voice low. "You always know." She met his gaze, then, without warning, lifted his hand to her face, her lips brushing the wound's edge. Soft, warm, a quiet vow. The fire snapped, the room stilled, and something unspoken passed between them, like a gate swinging wide in the silence. As the storm rolled in, snow dusting the windows, Caleb sat across from Leora at the table. He pulled a scrap of paper from his desk, his hand trembling as he scratched out words heavy with meaning. "I want to feel your heart, if you'll let mine hear it." He slid it toward her. She traced each letter, her fingers lingering as if touching the truth beneath the ink. When she looked up, her eyes glistened, not with sorrow, but with a quiet fire. She reached across, pressing his hand to her chest just once, just enough. Then for the first time she smiled. A dawn breaking, a warmth unfurling after years of restraint. The wind howled outside, but within the cabin a deeper silence bloomed, alive and true. Caleb felt it, their hearts speaking where words failed, a bond forged not in sound, but in the steady beat of trust. Leora, who heard the world's pulse without ears, had opened a door to a language Caleb never knew he craved. And in that moment he understood. She was not just a part of his world. She was its heart, beating steady, unyielding through the storm. Winter tightened its grip on the Texas plains, but between the snow-dusted ridges, a warmth grew within. Caleb Warwick's ranch. Leora's presence wove a quiet thread through the days, her hands shaping a rhythm that softened the harsh edges of Caleb's solitary life. She taught him signs, simple ones at first: water, fire, gratitude. Her fingers, moving like reeds in a gentle breeze. Caleb's hands fumbled, clumsy but earnest, and though she never laughed, her touch guided him, patient, until the gestures felt like his own. In return, he showed her the saddle, steadying her as she gripped the horn, knuckles pale, her body. Learning the horse's sway through instinct alone, they moved together, not with words, but with a shared pulse that spoke louder than speech. Their evenings settled into a ritual, meals by the hearth, glances that carried whole conversations, a silence that hummed with meaning. Caleb noticed her habits, the way she smiled at dusk when sparrows flocked, the slight flinch at a log's sharp crack in the fire, her uncanny sense of storms before clouds gathered. One night he signed haltingly, "You fill this place." Leora paused, her eyes tracing his hands, then touched her fingers to his lips. Not a kiss, but a vow, a way to say, "I feel you too." The cabin, once a shell of solitude, now cradled a bond that needed no voice to thrive. One bitter night, Caleb dozed by the fire, exhausted from mending fences under a biting wind. The sky had seemed calm, no hint of trouble. The lanterns, glow dimming low. He woke to Leora's hand on his shoulder, her face taut, urgent. She tugged his coat, pointing to the barn, her eyes shouting what her lips could not. Outside the air crackled, clouds racing across a moonlit sky, the wind sharp with warning. In the barn, horses thrashed, hooves striking wood, their panic a mirror of the storm's brewing wrath. Leora moved through the chaos like a shadow, her touch calming each trembling flank. Caleb followed, heart pounding, when a groan split the air, a beam overhead splintering under the wind's assault. "We gotta move 'em," he yelled, but Leora was already guiding the chestnut mare out, her hands flashing signs, roofs falling now. Together they herded the horses to a shelter by the house, rain hammering like fists. As the last colt cleared the barn, the north beam buckled, the roof collapsing in a roar of timber and dust where they'd stood moments before. Caleb turned, rain-soaked, to find Leora watching the wreckage, her hair plastered to her face, chest rising with steady breaths. She stood rooted, part of the storm yet apart from it, her gaze unwavering. "How'd you know?" he asked, voice lost to the gale. She touched her chest, then pointed skyward, her eyes saying, "I felt it." In the cabin, he draped a blanket over her shoulders and sat close, their hands brushing. He signed, slow and sure, "You belong here." Her smile flickered, soft as candlelight, and she pressed his palm to her heart, its rhythm quiet, fierce, a truth deeper than sound. Caleb knew then she didn't just hear the world. She heard him, in ways he'd never been heard before, Beyond the ranch, the town stirred, not with torches now, but with cautious steps. The change came slowly, like dawn creeping over the hills. First was Elias Holt, a ranch hand with a wrenched arm. The doctor miles away. He rode up one grey morning, hat in hand, nodding past Caleb to Leora, who knelt by a patch of sage. "Heard she mends what's broke," Elias said, voice low. Caleb nodded, stepping aside. Leora studied the injury, her hands probing gently, finding the pain's root. She bound it with cloth and herbs, and 2 days later, Elias flexed his arm, grinning. Next came a widow, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Leora sat with her at twilight, hands resting on her trembling shoulders until the tension eased. The next dawn, the woman returned with a woven shawl and a jar of preserves, murmuring, "For the girl who senses what we can't." Winter wore on, and the town's venom softened. Passers-by tipped their hats. A few left apples or honey at the gate. Each morning Leora scrawled on a chalkboard by the kitchen, "Today we'll sing, I know it." Some days she was wrong, but most she was right, and folks began to trust her quiet certainty. One Sunday, as frost glittered on the grass and the church bell tolled, panic swept the town. A 7-year-old boy, out for morning chores, had vanished. His boot lay near a creek bed, nothing more. Voices rose, dogs bayed, mothers wept. Caleb and Leora heard the clamour from the ranch, and he reached for his coat. Leora, already at his side, pressed a hand to his arm, then knelt, her palms sinking into the cold earth, wrists buried, feeling its pulse. She rose, tracing faint signs, a scuffed stone, a snapped twig, and moved forward, Caleb trailing, then Elias, then others, through brambles and up rocky slopes. In a cedar-ringed clearing, they found him, curled beneath a leaning tree, ankles swollen, face streaked with dirt and fear. Leora knelt, checking his leg, brushing hair from his eyes, her touch steady, relieved. She glanced at Caleb, not with pride, but with quiet assurance. The boy was carried home, and as the tale spread, no one called Leora strange. They named her what she was, the woman who hears with her soul. That evening, the wind sighed gently over the plains, as if whispering her name with reverence, a name that carried no sound but held all the weight of truth. The Texas plains stretched wide under a winter sky, the ranch a steadfast anchor amidst the cold. Caleb, Warwick, and Leora moved through their days with a quiet harmony, their bond deepening like roots beneath the frost. The cabin, once a hollow refuge, now thrummed with life, Leora's careful hands tending the fire, Caleb's steady presence mending the world around them. They built a small lean-to off the house, a haven for shared moments, where they sat by lantern light, trading signs and glances that wove a tapestry of understanding. Her signs grew bolder, home, heart, always, and Caleb's hands, once hesitant, now shaped them with a tender resolve. Leora's gift shimmered in the smallest acts. She'd pause by the pasture, sensing a mare's unease before it showed, or scatter herbs to soothe a restless calf. Caleb marveled at her, no longer questioning how she knew, only grateful she did. One evening, as snowflakes swirled outside, he signed, "You make the silence sing." Her eyes softened, and she traced a finger along his palm, a silent reply that warmed the air between them. The ranch was no longer just land, it was theirs. A world carved by trust and unspoken vows. The town's heart began to shift, slow but sure, like a river carving new paths. Where once there were sneers, now came cautious nods. A drover with a lame wrist sought Leora's touch, leaving with a bound arm and a quiet thanks. A mother, her child listless with cough, brought a basket of bread in exchange for Leora's steeped herbs, the child's laughter returning by dawn. Each visitor left a mark, a jar of jam, a knitted cap, a murmured blessing. Leora's chalkboard by the kitchen bore daily promises. "Today will mend, I feel it." More often than not, it did, and the townsfolk began to lean into her quiet wisdom. Yet, shadows lingered. A few still whispered, their words sharp as flint. The cobbler's wife, folding laundry by the well, hissed, "She knows too much, sees what ain't ours to see." A rancher swore his goat faltered after Leora passed his fence, but these voices grew faint, drowned by those who'd felt her care. Caleb saw the change in Leora's step, less guarded, her shoulders easing as the town's fear softened into awe. He said nothing, but his chest swelled with pride for the woman who'd turned suspicion into something sacred. One bitter morning, as ice glazed the creek, a cry rang out. A girl, barely 8, had strayed during a dawn errand. Her shawl snagged on a thorn bush, but she was gone. The town rallied, boots crunching through snow, voices hoarse with worry. Caleb and Leora heard the news from a breathless rider, and she was already moving, her coat half-buttoned, eyes sharp with purpose. At the creek's edge, she knelt, pressing her hands to the frozen ground, fingers splayed, feeling for a trace, a bent reed, a scuff in the frost. She rose, pointing north, and led the way, Caleb at her side, a growing crowd behind. Through tangled briars and up a rocky gully, Leora moved with certainty, pausing only to read the earth's subtle signs. In the hollow beneath a snow-draped pine, they found the girl, shivering, her ankle twisted, eyes wide with fear. Leora crouched, wrapping her shawl around the child, her hands gentle as she checked for harm. The girl clung to her, and Leora's eyes met Caleb's, a quiet relief passing between them. Carried home, the girl warmed by a fire. The town buzzed not with doubt but with gratitude. They called Leora the one who feels the world, her name a soft hymn on the wind. That night, as the ranch settled under a starlit hush, Caleb and Leora sat by the hearth. The fire's glow danced across her face, her hands still, folded in her lap. He'd watched her all day, her strength a beacon, her silence a language he'd learned to love. He reached for a scrap of paper, his hand steady as he wrote, "Your heart speaks louder than any voice. Will you let me stay in its song?" He slid it to her, his pulse quickening. Leora read it, her fingers brushing the words, then looked up, her gaze steady, deep. She signed, slow and clear, always. Then, for the first time, she leaned forward, her lips grazing his cheek, not a promise, but a truth, warm and unshakable. Outside, the wind whispered through the mesquite, but inside, their silence was a vow, a shared rhythm that needed no sound. Caleb felt it, the weight of years alone lifting, replaced by a certainty that Leora was not just his companion, but his home. She, who heard the earth's heartbeat, had taught him to hear his own, and in that quiet they found a love that burned brighter than any storm. Spring crept over the Texas plains, thawing the frost and coaxing green from the rugged earth. Caleb. Warwick's ranch bloomed with a quiet vitality, mirrored by the bond he and Leora nurtured. Their days wove a steady rhythm, Leora tending the garden with hands that seemed to speak to the soil, Caleb mending fences with a newfound lightness in his step. They'd carved a life together, not with grand declarations, but in the small, deliberate acts that filled their silences with meaning. She signed hope and home with a grace that steadied his heart, and he'd learned to reply with gestures. Of his own, each one a vow shaped in the air. Leora's touch remained a marvel. She'd pause by a restless colt, her palm calming its trembling flank before it shied, or scatter herbs to ease a cow's labored breathing. Caleb no longer questioned her instincts. He trusted them, as he trusted the dawn to break. One morning, as they worked side by side in the stable, he signed, "You make the land breathe." Her eyes crinkled, not quite a smile, but a warmth that lit the dim barn. She touched his wrist, a fleeting gesture that said, "And you make it sing." Their world, once marked by solitude, now pulsed with a shared heartbeat. The town's tide turned further, its suspicion softening like clay under rain. Where once there were sidelong glances, now came quiet gratitude. A farrier, his hand crushed under a cart, sought Leora's care, leaving with a bound wrist and a nod of thanks. A widow, her sleep stolen by grief, found solace in Leora's gentle presence, returning with a quilt stitched in thanks. By the gate, jars of preserves and woven baskets piled up, tokens of a trust hard won. Leora's chalkboard bore new messages. Today will bloom, I know it. Most days it did, and the townsfolk leaned into her quiet prophecies. Yet whispers persisted, faint as a dying breeze. A shopkeeper muttered of Leora's strange ways, claiming she'd passed his herd before a calf took ill. A rancher's wife, her voice low at the market, swore Leora's gaze unsettled her chickens. But these voices were drowned by those who'd felt her healing touch, who'd seen her quiet strength. Caleb watched Leora move through the town's shifting heart, her steps lighter, her hands less guarded. He said nothing, but his pride in her burned fierce, a flame fed by her unyielding grace. One crisp dawn, as wildflowers dotted the hills, panic struck the town again. A young boy, no older than 9, had wandered off while tending sheep, his cap found tangled in a briar patch near a dry wash. The townsfolk rallied, their shouts echoing, dogs baying through the dust. Caleb and Leora heard the news from a breathless rider, and she was already moving, her eyes sharp with purpose. At the wash, she knelt, pressing her hands to the earth, fingers tracing faint marks, a scuffed stone, a bent stem. She rose, pointing west, and led the way, Caleb at her side, a small crowd trailing. Through tangled scrub and up a rocky ridge, Leora moved with a quiet certainty, pausing to read the land's subtle signs. In a shadowed gully, beneath a wind-twisted cedar, they found the boy, curled tight, his knee bruised, face streaked with fear and cold. Leora knelt, wrapping her shawl around him, her hands gentle as she checked his injuries. The boy clung to her, and her gaze met Caleb's, a shared relief that needed no words. Carried home, warmed by a fire, the boy's return sparked no whispers of doubt. The townsfolk named Leora the one who hears the earth, her gift a quiet hymn that echoed through the valley. That evening, as the ranch settled under a twilight glow, Caleb and Leora sat by the cottonwood tree behind the house, a wooden bench their refuge. The air was soft, the sky brushed with amber and violet. Caleb poured 2 mugs of tea, steam curling in the dusk, and Leora took his hand, her thumb tracing a slow rhythm across his knuckles. He pulled a harmonica from his pocket, playing a nameless tune, its notes rippling through the still air. Leora closed her eyes, swaying as if she felt the melody in her bones. Then, in a moment as gentle as the breeze, Leora turned to him. She'd learned a few words over the years, enough to shape them carefully, though she preferred her hands. Tonight she spoke, her voice soft as a feather falling. I don't need sound, only you. Caleb stilled, his throat tight, the words sinking deep. He nodded, his voice low. I hear you, always will. They sat there, shoulder to shoulder, as the last light faded, their silence a vow louder than any shout. Leora's chalkboard, the next morning, read, Today will hold us, I feel it. No one questioned her. They believed, and Caleb knew. Her heart was his home, and his was hers, bound by a love that spoke in the quiet. Years rolled over the Texas plains, each season etching deeper lines into Caleb Warwick's face and threading silver through Leora's long hair. The ranch stood steadfast, weathered but wise, its timbers holding the weight of a life built on quiet trust. Time wasn't measured in days or numbers, but in moments, hands clasped in the dusk, the soft creak of the porch bench, the shared breath of mornings when the world felt new. Caleb walked slower now, his shoulders bowed by labor, but Leora's presence kept the ranch alive, its pulse steady as her own. Children came often, drawn from town and distant hills, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the land's stillness. They gathered around Leora in the garden, learning to read the twitch of a rabbit's ear or the shiver of a colt's flank, not with words, but with the same quiet instinct she'd always carried. She taught them to listen with their whole being, her hands guiding theirs to feel the earth's rhythm. Caleb built a low table under the cottonwood tree where they sat, Leora showing them how to sense fear or trust in a creature's pause. Her smiles, rare and radiant, came when a child understood without speaking, their eyes wide with wonder. One winter, as snow blanketed the ridges, a boy vanished during a fierce storm, his tracks swallowed by the white. The town's panic reached. The ranch at dawn, a rider's voice, hoarse with urgency. Leora, her coat dusted with frost, knelt outside the barn, palms pressed to the frozen ground, her face tilted to the wind's sharp bite. She rose, pointing west, her eyes certain, and led Caleb through the blinding snow, their steps crunching in unison. The townsfolk followed, no longer doubting their trust in her, a quiet flame. Through a pine grove, where branches sagged under ice, Leora traced the land's faint signs, a snapped twig, a scuff in the snow. Beneath a fallen log they found the boy, curled tight, shivering but alive, his breath a faint cloud. Leora wrapped him in her cloak, her hands steady as she warmed his face, her gaze meeting Caleb's with a quiet relief. The boy was carried home, and the town's whispers held no fear, only reverence. They called her the one who hears with her heart, her name a soft echo across the plains, carried by a wind that knew every story the land held. The final days of winter found Caleb and Leora walking the pasture, the sky wide with hues of amber and lilac. Their steps were slow, deliberate, a mare and her foal grazing nearby, the world hushed but never empty. They paused at the hill's crest, Leora turning. To Caleb, her face alight with a laugh, not loud, but a ripple that shook her shoulders, bright as dawn. Caleb smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple, soft and sure. No one told their story, it didn't need telling. It lived in the quiet moments, in the way their hands found each other, in the silence that spoke louder than any vow. Their love wasn't shouted from rooftops, but walked beside them, steady, real, a truth woven into the Texas earth. If you've ever felt a gaze that understood without words, if you believe love speaks in the quiet courage of a heart that listens, then Caleb and Leora's tale is yours. Out on the wild plains, where wind and silence share a tongue, a solitary rancher and a woman the world called silent found a language deeper than sound, a bond of hands, glances, and hearts that heard each other's truth. Thank you for riding this trail with us. If tales of love that endure through hardship, prejudice, and unspoken grace stir your soul, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories, hit the bell for new stories, like, and share your thoughts below. May your quiet moments be full, and may someone always hear the heart you carry. Until the next tale, keep listening.